Therese Corey. I'm a professor in the philosophy department here at Notre Dame and the director of the Maritime Center and History of Philosophy Forum. It's my very great pleasure to introduce our next speaker for the Conway Lecture Series, Roberto Lambertini. Professor Lambertini is the Associate Professor of History of Medieval Europe and Full Professor of Medieval History at the University of Macerata and the Director of the Centro Interuniversitario di Studi Francescani. Since his early career, in which he worked with luminaries of medieval studies such as Carlo Docini, Sten Ebbesen, and Pietro Rossi, Professor Lambertini's interests have especially been oriented around the early period of the Franciscan order. His doctoral thesis at the University of Bologna, published in 1990, explored the institutional self-consciousness of the Franciscans in the 13th century. From there, Professor Lambertini has published extensively on the intellectual history of the 13th and 14th centuries, particularly focusing on ethical, ecclesiological, and political themes. His book published in 2000, La Povertà Pensata, addresses poverty and the self-conception of the Minorites. And more recently, in 2019, he has explored how the concept of consent was constructed in the medieval context, a particularly interesting question. And this is in an edited volume together with Maria Pia Alberzoni called Costruire il Consenso. Also in 2019, with Mario Conetti, he published an introduction to medieval political thought, which traces the development of political thought through 3 critical periods. And his most recent book has appeared in 2020, called Francesco, I suoi frati e l'etica dell'economia, Francis, his friars, and economic ethics. Professor Lambertini's leadership in the field extends in many directions. He is a member of the Consiglio Direttivo of the Società Internazionale di Studi Francescani, an editor of the journal Picenum Seraphicum, and a member of numerous scientific committees. Among the many recognitions that Professor Lambertini's work has received, I'm proud to say that he's a fellow Humboldtianer doing research at the University of Heidelberg in 1992 and 2000, and his work has also been supported by the government of Denmark. In 2010, he delivered the lectures of the Centre Pierre Abelard at the Sorbonne. It is a great pleasure to welcome Professor Lambertini here to the Medieval Institute for our second 2024 Conway Lecture, and I look forward to hearing him speak on Christ's kingship in late medieval political thought, Pierre, Ceffons, in context. Please help me welcome Professor Lambertini.
Good afternoon. Thank you for the too generous introduction. I would like to thank the Medieval Institute, its director and vice director, for this invitation, which is a real honor to me, a pleasure, and an opportunity to share ideas with esteemed colleagues and friends. I would like to thank today's audience as well and ask for your patience, at least as far as my English is concerned. Be tolerant, because so it's something I never was able to improve after beyond this limit. First of all, a word of acknowledgement. I owe this project to a friend and colleague, Christopher Schable, who has presented on Pierre Ceffons here in Notre Dame at the Medieval Institute, I think in 1218, and afterwards suggested that we, he and me together could work on an edition of Ceffons' Parvum Decretum. So thanks to this suggestion of Chris Schable, I got more interested in Ceffons. And this, what I'm presenting today, is a sort of a follow-up of his contribution of some years ago, and also of the articles he has been publishing. In the meanwhile, some of them together we published together. So first, some notes about Pierre Ceffons, Cistercian monk, entered the order in Clairvaux, one of the most famous monastery of the Cistercian order. And but what we have from him comes from his years in Paris, where he studied at the Cistercian college. Here, the Cistercian order had established a college for his members who were chosen to have an academic path, and so our author was active at this college. Is the picture you see? It's a wonderful part of the college, which is still extant in Paris, in Rue de Poissy. You can visit. It's now in a center for ecumenical studies. Really wonderful. And somewhere in this building, I can't, of course, say whether exactly here, Ceffons delivered his lessons on the sentences in and the academic year 1348, 1349. Starting on this building, on this lecture, he then left us his sentence commentary, which is mostly unedited. So only some questions are available in a critical edition. Besides this commentary on the sentences, Ceffons has left us other works, mainly on ecclesiology and politics. I lists them. There is a rather well-known Epistola Luciferi. I will come back after the Parvum Decretum, which is the object of the project I'm working now, the Centilogium, and the Confessionale Petri. Actually, I will not deal with the Confessionale Petri, although it's a very interesting work. It deals, for example, with the problem of papal infallibility. So it would be worthwhile a project of its own to compare it with the discussion of the same decades on this very interesting and debated issue at the time. But as you'll see, I will make reference to the other three works, and first of all, to the letter from the devil. The letter from the devil is of course a literary fiction. It's interesting that it was actually delivered to the Papal Curia. We have two independent chronicles, one an Italian and a French one, which witness to the fact that some at some certain point in between 1351 and 32, the letter arrived in Avignon. Most probably, no likelihood, was brought by another famous Cistercian of the time, the cardinal, the so-called White Cardinal William Court. You have, as you see, it is the beginning, the beginning of the letter is already very clear. Lucifer, with all his titles, writes to the Papal Curia saying that we wish you greeting and that you obey our commands, and as you have begun, follow the rules of Satan and continually observe the precepts of our law. It's of course an attack on the Curia, and I decided to emphasize, highlight this passage because that here the devil contrasts the beginning of the church, the primitive church, where the first popes lived in poverty and almost converted the whole world from the yoke of our tyranny. So the devil writes that he was very in a great difficulty in front of the church at its beginning, but luckily he succeeded in bringing the modern church to his part, and then he writes, you who have fallen from the state of grace and who administer for us on earth, the promise I made to Christ that he refused is fulfilled, and now through us you hold the earthly empires that we have conferred on you. So this the idea of the devilish origin of papal power, and contrasted with the beginnings of the church. So we could say that the devil here reverses in praise the reproach that numerous critics of papal power of the time were leveling at the Curia. It was usual to, of course, to contrast the poverty and purity of the early church with the current undue occupation of temporal power. So the letter from the devil was at the beginning anonymous, but the anonymity didn't last long. So that Ceffons himself admits to have written it in later works. So And if you would like to read it in full, in Vivarium 2018, there is Christa Schable edition and translation into English. I have used, I must say that the Middle Ages received many letters from the from the devil, but this either not very often attributed to Ceffons himself, almost sometimes Anonymous had a really significant success. It still exists in more than 100 manuscripts and translations in different vernaculars and also in early print. So it was really a good editorial success. So he now, so we pass to another letter, which is by Ceffons. Again, so he had written in name of the devil, but he also wrote in name of Christ, and has a very long letter addressed to again to the prelates of the church. Where this had not had the same success of the devil letter, so only four or five manuscripts in total. So, but in this long letter, where there is embedded also a dialogue between Christ and Petrus, Pierre Ceffons, who is said to be acting as the public notary of Christ and taking notes. At a certain point, he uses the expression reportator, technical expression. And there's a long dialogue between the two, and at a certain point, Christ says, I haven't answered all the points the devil makes in his letter, but I know that you have discussed one very important recently. So please attach to my letter the written version of your question, and the question is this one: is what we call, for brevity's sake, parvum decretum, which is not an invention of scholars. It's found in manuscripts too, but because it's a very long second title regarding whether the authority of the Supreme Pontiff on secular princes extends somewhat over temporal matters. So, so between the devil and Christ, you see here a famous painting by Lucio di Boninsegna, there is the question of the power of the Pope. And the question of the power of the Pope at the time of in which Ceffons is writing had really become a sort of literary genre, or to say it a little better, there was a literary genre which we, the scholars now, call de potestate papae texts, which had a very long-lasting literary genre, which is one of the best carriers of political thought in the 14th century and in the 15th too. We all scholars, especially to Jürgen Mietke, the definition of this literary genre, which was on Mietke's account, which originated, according to Mietke, at the time of the dispute and the conflict between Boniface VIII and Philip the Fair, but lasted longer. And so by the time Ceffons wrote his Parvum Decretum, had already almost 50 years. Was 50 years old. This tradition of discussing the power of the Pope, which is of particular interest for students of late medieval political thought, because discussing limits or extensions of the papal power, they discuss also the nature of power. Not only they take position for the Pope or for, let's say, secular rulers, be they the kings or the emperor, but really the debate, the conflict between Boniface VIII and Philip IV triggered an in-depth reflection of intellectuals on the nature of power. Of course, there was a practical end to take the floor in the debate, but to take the floor, they were, so to speak, compelled to go in depth and explain their theory or at least doctrine of the origins of power, why should the papal power be superior vis-a-vis the imperial power. So we reached the Parvum Decretum, and so here we are. So the Parvum Decretum is the project Chris Schable and me are working at presently. The text itself is now extant in 4 manuscripts. Chris Schable has done the critical edition, almost finished, on the base of these 4 manuscripts for the history of medieval political thought. It's particularly interesting that during this during the work on the Parvum Decretum, together we discovered that the author of the much more famous Somnium Viridari, which is, everybody knows that Evrard de Tromogon was a terrible compiler. So the big work known as Somnium Viridari, and then translated into French as the Songe du Verger, is a giant compilation made in the form of a dialogue between a cleric and a knight. But but the materials, the words that Evrada Tomagon puts in the mouth of the two discussants are taken from many sources. One source is until now not known, is Ceffons' Parvum Decretum, which is, I think, almost for the 80% copied into the Somnium Viridari and then translated. Most probably, the Latin version was done already at the beginning with the purpose of a vernacular translation. This is one very likely hypothesis. So the materials prepared by Ceffons became very well spread in the French version of the Somnium Viridari, which had a very fairly good success from the point of view then of the manuscripts. So we had two fictional letters, and now we have a mysterious choir, because in Parvum Decretum, Ceffons says that he has found a choir, quaternus. And he has found some arguments. He suspects the argument that the author, or at least the inspirator of this text, are Marsilius of Padua and John of Gendin. So maybe we could have some doubts, because as we have seen, Ceffons loves fictions. Maybe there's also a very well spread fiction of the unknown manuscript found in a library. Actually, Marsilius and Gendin were, after the condemnation of the Defensor Pacis in 1327, the quintessence of the heretic as far as papal power and nature of the church was concerned. So, but I am convinced, we are convinced that this choir, of course, this is not the choir, Ceffons' choir, because it's just an example I found on e-codices to remember how a choir not bound in a codex can look like. I think this is a little older than our Ceffons, but I think that the choir existed in reality. So this is not a fiction, and one of points I think can be made in this direction is that actually Ceffons is wrong in identifying the origin of the doctrines. So, studying this, the text he declares he has copied from this mysterious choir and inserted in the Parvum Decretum, one can discover that actually he had found a copy of a text which is known otherwise as public, critically edited among Occam's Dubia et Spuria by Hilary Sittenhoffler. It's a text called Allegationes de Potestate Imperiali. It is a typical collective enterprise coming from the circle of the Franciscans in Munich. There are, besides some very famous texts which can be we have one author, Bonagrazia's Appeals, William of Occam's Dialogus, the group in of the Franciscans in Munich has produced a lot of longer and shorter texts, almost repeating the same ideas against the Pope, and in many cases is very difficult to identify only one author. It's like they had a workshop working night and day producing texts against the Pope. So clearly the version of the Allegationes Ceffons found is one of the two extant versions of these Allegationes, which is said by according to Offler, is in more Occamist than the other. So it's a question of small details, but so Ceffons thought to have at hand a text influenced by Marsilius of Padua and John of Jandun. The reason why he couples the two is that the condemnation by the Pope consider John of Jandun and Marsilius of Padua both authors of the Defensor Pacis. A claim that modern scholarship was not able to confirm that the Marsilius, that the Defensor Pacis was written not only by Marsilius of Padua but also by his friend John of Jandun. This is the reason why Ceffons puts the two together, but he thinks that they are at the origin or have influenced the choir he has found, but in reality, if there is somebody who has influenced the choir, is of course the group of the Franciscans, rebellious Franciscans in Munich. Why is Ceffons so interested in this choir? Because it contains a series of arguments against a claim. The claim is that Christ's kingship was not only a spiritual kingship, but also a temporal one. So that he was a real king and had a legitimate jurisdiction. So this is, and he finds, Ceffons finds in this choir a number of arguments which deny this claim, try to confute it. Why is this a politically interesting issue. I'll try to give a couple of examples which can. We find the discussion, for example, in John of Paris. John of Paris, in his famous text on royal and papal power, at a certain point discusses the opinion according to which Christ was a temporal king, and denies it, and has a list of arguments against this, and makes this distinction, which we will see will come back more than once. Christ as God was, of course, the Lord of the universe, but as a human being was not a temporal king. The consequence which John of Paris draws from this claim is that therefore he had no jurisdiction on temporal goods. So he, unlike a king, he did not exert any jurisdiction, had no power on the property of the member of his kingdom, because he was as a man only a spiritual king. This is we know that John of Paris on papal power, on royal and papal power, was written as a defense of Philip the Fair. One of the less known targets of John of Paris' work was James of Viterbo. Not the James of Viterbo of the famous De Regimine Christiano, the ecclesiological treatise. He has written probably after on royal and papal power. But James of Viterbo had taught in Paris before returning to Italy and becoming Archbishop in Naples. And taught, and as a part of his magisterial activity in Paris, he had held a quodlibet. And one of the questions of this quodlibet regarded a very subtle discussion about the right of the Pope to absolve usurers. Arguing for the power of the Pope of absolving usurers, James of Viterbo had made a case in favor of the fact that the Pope is the ultimate Lord of all things, of all goods which belong to Christians. So for this reason, John of Paris takes James of Viterbo, not the later, but the earlier James of Viterbo, as a particular target in his on royal and papal power, which is, as I mentioned, written in defense of Philip the Fair against Boniface VIII. Another example of this discussion, which is there can be more examples, but I chose Dante also because Notre Dame is famous for Dante's studies. So, if we go to in Monarchia, in the book 3, chapter 14, we find Dante arguing about the power of the church of establishing imperial power. Of course, as you can imagine, Dante denies it, and on the basis that the founder of the church, Christ, was not a king, or better, was a king as God, but as model of the church. The language, Dante's language here is not completely the same, is a little different from other authors, but this is the case almost in every discussion in the Monarchia, say that Christ renounced this kingdom in the presence of Pilate, saying, "My kingdom is not of this world." This is the famous quote. You can remember this is the same quote used by the devil in his letter to his purposes. John of Paris, Dante, and now the apostolic poverty controversy. I don't annoy you going back to the history of the apostolic poverty controversy, but I just want to remember that in 1322, Pope John the 22nd opened a consultation. He actually collected texts by theologians and other church persons like archbishops, experts in canon law, about the question regarded the Franciscan interpretation of Christ's poverty, and many of the answers the Pope received was against many were against the Franciscan interpretation of Christ's poverty. In a nutshell, the Franciscan idea was that Christ and the apostle were absolutely poor. In which sense? That they had no right on the things they made use of. It was a very formal definition. And when the Pope was clearly against this idea, opened a discussion, the result was that almost only Franciscans defended this position. The rest, Dominicans, Augustinian, hermits, members of the secular clergy denied this interpretation of Christ's poverty. Among them, one Dominican theologian, Raymond Becquin, or Becchini, which is interesting for us because he develops an argument against the Franciscan position, saying that Christ, being the real Messiah, was a king, a real king. So it is not possible to claim that he was poor. he had rights. He had rights on the property of his subjects. Of course, there was a discussion, an open discussion among civil lawyers, as to the extent of the rights of the king on the property of his subjects. Somebody claimed that he was the lord of everything which was contained in his kingdom. Somebody had a different, more moderate opinion, but in every case, one could not say that a king is poor. And this is Becan's argument. Since Christ was king, as a human being was a temporal king, the Franciscan position is untenable, completely impossible. And as the Pope had suggested in his framing the question, is heretical to claim that Christ was poor in the sense implied by the Franciscan position. Some years after, the Pope, after the end of the discussion, or the open discussion, comes back to this issue, publishing a long bull, which is actually more than a bull, a treatise. Quia Reprobus occupies many pages of Gideon Gall's and David Flood's edition. So it's a very unusual bull. So it's difficult, and in fact, you don't find it in a collection of canon law. It's a very unusual. In this bull, he wants to answer blow after blow to Franciscan criticism against his position, and one of the arguments he uses is again the argument of Christ's kingship. Many prophets prophesied that he would be king of the Israelite people and consequently would have lordship of a kingdom. This is somehow the Pope drew inspiration from Raymond Becchini, probably. He had the opinion of Raymond Becchini copied in a manuscript. We know he has read because he has his handwritten annotation on the margins. So, and he takes this idea and develops further. As you see, the kingship and universal lordship, Jesus said, as God from eternity and as man from a time, namely from the moment of his conception. So we have here the we have here the full developed form of this interpretation of Christ's kingship. from which you can guess that it's more than has developed into a more than a counter example against the Franciscan. It's let's call it a theological political claim. Christ, not only as God but as a man, was a real king. Therefore, his vicar, his, so to say, the heir also of this temporal kingdom, and is, of course, which kingdom? Universal, because the Christ had no limitations to limits to his powers. So it's a Lord of the whole of all the world, and this implies that that his vicar has received the same power. Of course, the Munich Franciscans stated bluntly that it was a new heresy by John the 22nd, but we pass this, and we go back also to conclude to come to a conclusion to Ceffons and the arguments he has found in the mysterious choir. Actually, as you can imagine, the arguments he has found in the choir are being a part of the allegaciones de potestate imperiali, are actually in perfect line with the position of the Franciscans. But the interesting thing is that Ceffons takes these arguments to refute them. I just make an example. When they say that Christ had no lordship, or that they is the people who wrote the arguments in the choir, had no lordship, or that he was not a lord, this is rejected. When they make the example that Christ fled to the mountain, the typical quotation from the Gospel of John to show that Christ didn't want to become a temporal king. This is the objection. It should be answered that in this particular case, Christ showed us signs of humility. And although he was really a king, he didn't want to engage in the duties of kingship, showing that the apostles should leave the direct exercise of their temporal powers to others. This is this argument by Ceffons, who maintains that Christ was really a king, although he didn't act accordingly, and has, of course, the necessity of explaining this paradox. And he tries to explain this paradox, saying that arguing that Christ acted out of humility as example for the apostles and their successors. And here we have another argument in the same. Maybe the strongest is among Ceffons' arguments is the Franciscans say that he was a divine king, a spiritual king, and therefore not a temporal king. But it doesn't follow that if he had been a divine king, he wouldn't in reality have been also a king over all temporal things. There is no, they are not mutually exclusive, these two claims. That the consequences for the political theory in Ceffons is that, of course, Christ was a temporal ruler, then the temporal claims of the papacy can be justified. But my concluding question for which I have no a definite answer: how can the same person write the letter from the devil and the Paramum Decretum? So on one hand, he writes a satire, a biting satire against the papal curia in Avignon, and not many years after, probably only months, he has a written version of the text that supports the temporal powers of the papacy. Schabel has written of ambivalence, maybe even worse than ambivalence. And Ceffons is completely aware of this. He is trying to to synthesize his position. He has an attempt to justify a sort of consistency of his position over time. On one hand, he says Christ was a real king, didn't show it in his behavior out of humility, and therefore church prelates must be humble. So a moral consequences, a more institutional one. Christ didn't act as a temporal king, although he was one, because he was of course gave more importance to the spiritual part of his mission, and the same must be true for his vicar and the prelates. They should live the immediate, direct execution of temporal affairs to others, to secular authorities, but the maintaining an authority over them. So this is our Ceffons solution. And so he, as you can see, if we are to take seriously Ceffons, which is what I'm trying to do, in him, as in many other authors, so moral critique of the behavior of ecclesiastical power go hand in hand with a defense of the principles. So he criticizes the behavior of let's say, of the individuals, but not the institution itself. Although one can say that maybe he is too optimistic if he thinks that prelates in Avignon could be humble, revert to Christ's humility. But maybe he is not so naive. Maybe there is a different, another detail. I have a quote from the from the Prarum Decretum, where he writes direct to the critics of the papal curia. You would like to destroy the papal curia, and when this curia is destroyed, what happens? You will need another one. From the expression, it is clear that he addresses ecclesiastical targets, because he said you will need a place where to present appeals, to ask for benefits, and so on. And when this curia is destroyed, do you think that the new one, even, he says, even if it is a royal curia, so it's a royal court, would be better without sins? So actually, in the end, is not so much a naive moral exhortation to be better, but a pessimistic conservatism. Things cannot improve, so let's be content with the present and maybe exhort to those in power to be more moderate. So thank you.